Hello, this is Christopher lwestel Kinman with another edition of our Communal Practices experience. We travel today to Mexico, to the capital of the Yucatan province, the city of Merida. For there, in that place, is an educational organization called Kanankil. Now, the word Kanankil is a Myan word meaning something akin to conversation and relationship. One of the leaders of this organization is Dr. Papusa Molina. Papusa is a remarkable soul with a keen vision for the work of education. As you will hear, she imagines the educational endeavor as a work of remembering. Not just remembering, but of remembering. That is, of bringing together that which is being dismembered. She imagines an educational endeavor that counters the isolating, dismembering moves of colonialism, modernism, and positivism. This work of remembering involves the reestablishing of relations with the varieties of human life in our world. But it also means the reestablishing of relations with the world around us. In the Yucatan, this includes the stones, the stars, the sea, the palm trees, the fish, the crabs, the shells, the underground cenotes, so much more. This form of remembering also brings us close to that which is indigenous, to that which is ancestral to the lands we move upon. I am captured now with this concept of education as the work of remembering. But I must not say more right now. Instead, let's go to the Yucatan of Mexico. And let's enter into conversation with the wonderful Papusa Molina.
How do you want me to introduce you?
Well, however you want. I think that the great thing about when my friends introduce me is that it allows me to see how they see me. So say whatever you want, and then I add whatever I want.
Well, first of all, I would say you're a dear friend.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I would say you have a wonderful radical spirit. Thirdly, I would say that you have a very large heart. But aside from all of that, you're from Merida, Mexico, and you're one of the leaders of a training program there called Kanankil. And I've been there a few times, and it is one of my favorite places. And I feel when I'm there from you and from others, a true sense of community values or communal values, and a desire for the work that you're training people in to be reflective of those values. How's that for an intro?
I think it's pretty good. I like it. And I see my work at Kanankil as, I think, the culmination of the kind of the last phase of my work in some way.
Yeah.
Because I feel that really my work has always been patient. I've been teaching, I don't know, since I was like 10 or 12 years old, and teaching fractions to my little niece. And I remember always loving teaching and loving the transformation that happens in education, and education as a collective act. Because education is not something that comes from one person to another, but
Education
really
as
comes,
a collective act.
yeah, a collective act that also is kind of anchored in dialogue. So knowledge is something that gets generated and gets generated by the relationship and the interaction between the so-called teacher and the so-called students.
Yes.
And when you really think about that, what you are doing is really relating to these people called students. It transforms the way, quote unquote, you teach, and also transform what you teach, not just the subject, but it teaches the way, it transforms the way you relate also, you know? So
I love this. It's so, because we haven't touched on education yet. And all of a sudden we're touching on education as as communal act.
That's how I see myself, as an educator, really. You know, and through the years, that has been a constant line, and I have done it in multiple ways, not just in the classroom, but like for a while, you know, I live in the United States for 20 years.
Right.
And for a while, I was dedicated to do anti-oppression work. In the 80s and 90s, I did a lot of that around schools, colleges, universities, community, how oppression really affects all of us, no? And it affects us in a way that immobilizes us many times. To marginalize people keeps them in a cage kind of place, no?
Yeah.
But for people who are not really conscious about their privileges and act out of their privilege many times, and most of the time, it also keeps them immobilized in another type of cage.
Yes, yes.
No? So for me, doing all that work, for example, in the 80s and 90s, and I'm still doing it, is a way to, is another way of teaching, is another way of facilitating for knowledge to get generated in a collective way. And transform not just the individual, but also transform the collectivity and transform the community where these individual works and acts and lives. So, for example, no, for me is that, and then when I worked for the federal government, even if I was doing public policy, I was doing public policy, but also it was about also generating new knowledge and new ways of looking at things. No, not just for within the government, but also for the people we serve as public servants. That is how I see ourselves in the government. When you have a position, being an elected or a higher position, you're a public servant, is who you are. And so I saw myself in that way. And so the work I did during that time was, again, how do we generate transformational processes that act not just within the individual, but that acts by transforming something in the individual. A community, a collectivity gets transformed. So always thinking about that. So I think that has been a constant in my life.
I'm wondering if you have some stories you could tell us about, this knowledge is this collective way that you were talking about. And as you look through your career, if there's any stories of, that is a communal practice.
Well, sometimes it's very little, it's very small things, quote unquote, no? When I remember when I was first teaching high school, suddenly there was this guy who everybody saw him as not very bright, and he was always in trouble. He was always fighting with someone or not being a good student. And I remember one day just talking to him, and I said, it's very interesting because I think you are very clever. Because even the things you do that get you into trouble are very clever things. So what is going on? And he said, well, I'm getting tired of people saying that I'm not smart. I said, okay. So who is telling you that you are not smart? Well, my parents said that, at that time, I'm talking about the 70s, in Mexico, high school was not mandatory.
Right.
People had to study just to junior high, and that was enough. But the last 3 years of high school were not mandatory in Mexico. So many kids start working at the age of 15. And he was telling me, well, my parents wanted me to work. Mm. And I said that I wanted to go to school. And they said, well, you're not smart enough. Why do you want to go to school? And he said, what happened is I get very restless, very, I feel trapped in the classroom. And I said, well, what if I'm going to propose something? I said, what if you talk with other people with whom you get usually in trouble with, and we do something outside, not inside the classroom? But let's do it outside in the cafeteria or outside in the football, in the soccer field. But you are going to collect those kids that are always getting into trouble. And he said, oh, that's easy. It's all you have to do. So he formed like a study group with these kids. So they were trying, and I will just stop by for a little bit, like 15, 20 minutes, and we look at what are the homeworks they have, tasks, and said, how do you want to accomplish this homework? And they will come with quote unquote crazy ideas, no?
Mm.
And my role was to talk with the teachers and be kind of an advocate for them. So I will go and say, Chris, you know, so-and-so is in your class and they have to do this homework and they really don't want to do it in the way you assign it. Will you allow them to do it in a different way? And this kid ended up graduating with a very high GPA and going to college. And he was the leader of the guys that were getting in trouble. And all these guys started producing incredible things. They did murals, they did, in that time, there was no video, but they will get those little cameras and do little films. And they will do recordings and they will write poetry and they will take pictures and they will do incredible creative things. And they were getting into trouble because they felt restless in the classroom. So that's an example that stayed with me. That was this guy.
Example. I love those small ones. It was, you know, Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. Was that the guy? Yeah. It's important to go there. What a wonderful story. Share some more. You've got a long career. You must have some other ones.
Well, another example that is like very dear to me. So I was working when I started being the general director of the National Institute for Women, and I started, there were 2 domestic violence shelters in the whole country.
Wow.
When I left 26 domestic violence shelters.
Wow.
Mexico has 32 states, so we had one in every state when I left. And how did I do it? I started thinking, who are the people who can talk with women in their homes when their husbands, their partners are not around? And I thought about Mary Kay Cosmetics and Avon. So I talked with people and I said, everybody thinks, well, Mary Kay Cosmetics, Avon, really, they're very awful organizations, whatever you want to think about it. But these are women, first of all, who most of this of the people who sells these things are women who are trying to make some money that benefits really the whole family.
Yeah.
And 2, they are non-threatening at all for anybody.
Yes.
So I talked with the people in human resources and the people who train these women, and I got both organizations in Mexico to do a special campaign. So we did these little cards that women, when they visit other women, will leave these cards with them and talk. We train some of the representatives, as they call it, to talk with women in their homes. And also, they founded 2 of those 26 domestic violence shelters because we decided to dedicate 2 or 3 of the items they sold for this campaign. So here you have something. First of all, thousands of women were trained to identify domestic violence, and they identify not just in their lives, but also on the lives of the women they visit at their homes to sell their wares. And also the money came from beauty products. And it helped us create domestic violence shelters. And for them was incredible campaign because it shifted a little bit this image that they are products that are oppressive to women and how they contributed. So they used me, I used them, but what benefited was a collective action. It was a community that got benefits. And so there are many like those. And just this semester with a student, this student was always asking for more time to hand their homework, and the writing was not very good. And I said, you know, I bet something is going on. So I called her and I said, listen, I want to talk with you. You know, you have to write your thesis. This is a thesis seminar, and I see that something is going on. And so finally she said, well, Papusa, I have two things going on for me. I have dyslexia and I have attention deficit disorder. So it's very hard for me to write. So we start talking again. What can you do? What is easy for you? So she said, if somebody reads it for me. Yes, and she got 2 or 3 women who read for her. And it was the way she did her homework. But at the end, so right now, she was having trouble also with Rocio's class. So at the end, I talked with Rocio about it. I said, and I asked her permission to talk with Rocio, and which she ended up doing, and you will see it very soon in the Kanankil page in Facebook. She ended up doing like vignettes, inviting people to come and study at Kanankil and talking about her experience, how she felt, listen, seen, and she did 3 beautiful videos about her Kanankil experience.
Lovely.
Okay, so those are little things, but you know, so many things you don't know about it, you know. You go and do your work. Yeah. For me, I entered into the classroom, and you know, I'm out as a lesbian in the classroom, and I learned to do that because there's always somebody that sometimes years later that come and said, you know what, Papusa, what you did helped me.
Yes.
What you said changed my life. And so you never know sometimes that something you said, you did, transform the lives of others. So for me, education is a transformative process.
And when I was there, I don't remember the names, but there was this woman who on her own was starting up a treatment center in her home, kind of a poor part of town. And she on her own was doing it, and you people at Kanankil were helping her. Do you remember that story?
Yeah.
Can you fill
the
it out a
addiction
little bit?
treatment center.
Yeah.
Well, I was not that involved with that project. As a matter of fact, I was in the periphery of that project, but it's really the students who were doing their practicum there who noticed what was the situation, and they came and talked to us and me and Rocio, and they decided to do a lot of things, and they mobilized people. And if you go to that shelter today, you cannot believe it. It's huge, it's comfortable, it's beautiful. Of that very depressing place where it was all this woman had.
Yeah.
And she put it to the service of the community. But then what the Kanankil students did was incredible, and they did it just because they were doing their practicum there. Huh?
Many places would never send people for practicums at a place like that. But you did it, Kanankil. And the result, what happened from that, is a beautiful story.
Yeah. Our students at the beginning were just doing counseling, sitting on the sidewalk, on the, you know, without chairs, without anything.
Yeah, I remember. And
because there was nothing.
It moved me, that story.
The thing about being an educator, for example, for me, it connected me how you, for example, I remember my connection with you through your poetry and your writing. And I remember, but it's a way that in which you educate people, talk about that connection to the water and the river and the mountain and the birds and the eagles and everything, and the earth and the people who walk through this earth. And I remember how that touched me. No? And I learned that there was this aspect that I needed to introduce more explicitly in my teaching. So, for example, when I talk about relationality in my classes, I always talk about how we used to think about relationships in terms of human relationships.
Right.
And then I start talking, but what about everything else? What about the water and the ocean and the birds and the animals? How are those relationships? And now a student is writing a thesis about the healing that comes from animal relationships of people with animals.
Oh, wonderful.
With dogs. And it came out because she said to me, can we really do that? Yes, you can do it. Because
that's so encouraging. And when you participated in the film I made about Lynn Hoffman, you're on there talking about rhizome, and you talk about everything that connects to everything. It's my favorite part of the film. It's because these are ideas that mean a lot to you. And you're able to connect the rocks, the stars, and everything. And it felt like you were connecting to the Mexico you live in, and that history. It just moved me to tears when I first heard that.
Yeah, I would never talk about eagles, because in Yucatan we don't have eagles or salmon, but we have ocean.
Yes.
And we have shells.
Yes.
And we have crabs, and we have fish, and we have cenotes, you know, the underground rivers.
Yeah.
And that's, and palm trees, and all those things teaches you of a deep relationship with life, you know. And education for me is that.
Yes.
Is to relate to life.
One of the phrases I'm starting to hear up here, particularly by indigenous scholars, is the more or other than human relationships.
Mhm.
And so people are looking at that, you know. And there's also in the academic realm that, you know, we've had the postmodern, the post-structural, well, there's a new the post-human,
The post-human, yeah.
and or sometimes post-humanist. And I love that. So it's no longer just about us, you know, it's about all of those relations that are important. But when you shared them and it was so located to your home, it made me so happy.
I'm connecting with so many ideas right now. They are coming to my mind. I'm thinking about something that Rocio and I just wrote for Harlene's Anderson and Diane Gerhardt's book that is coming out.
Yeah.
That we call it Ancestral Knowledge, Postmodern Practices. That really what happened is we see that we forgot that indigenous people have always talked about these relationships more other than humans.
Yes.
And how life and knowledge and deep knowledge comes out of that relationship. And modernism, what has done in positivism is try to fracture this relationship, to separate it. And because of humans are the only animals who are capable of reason, quote unquote, then we are not like the other animals. But even if that is true, I'm not even going to argue against that. But our life is profoundly connected to water, to air, to fire, and to the earth.
Yes.
And through all those four elements, we are connected to animals, to rocks, to rivers, to oceans, to mountains, to sand, to fish, etc. So it is this idea that we need to separate reason, whatever that is. Like I always say, well, I'm thinking. What is that you are thinking? You are thinking here, you are thinking here. And we say, oh no, I'm thinking here. Well, who says that you're thinking here? So when you are having sex, are you thinking here? you are thinking some other places.
Yeah.
And maybe even here, just to call it somehow. But to start acknowledging that knowledge comes from our relationship with the context in which we live.
Yeah.
And that context is not just humans.
No.
So how do we come back to an education that and with parentheses, remember, the member, reconnect us, remember these connections? How do we
keep going?
Educate for transformation, for the transformation and not just quote unquote the humankind, but the transformation of our relationship with the totality of the planet.
Yeah.
You know? So I think I'm thinking lately about this idea of education to remember. To connect the members, to connect the different parts, and not to remember just as an intellectual memory, but to reconnect. And how do we connect? Not just with other human beings and all kinds of human beings, but also all kinds of elements that surround us.
Yeah.
And also that all these issues around separation and oppression and violence, I think it's because we feel dismembered. We are disconnected from each other.
Yeah.
Because if I can dehumanize someone, it's because I don't see that someone in the same category as I see me on my own, what I call my own. So violence comes from that for me, from this from this fracture.
Yes.
And how do we remember? And remember who we are as just one little part of this planet that has all kinds of people, and it has all kinds of colors and all kinds of shapes and all kinds of ways of breathing and growing and birthing and you know. So when we look at that, if we are able to reconnect, to remember that, maybe we can start remembering that other humans are members of me, are my members.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe we will have less violence, because violence nowadays is just so prevalent.
Yeah.
Every place where you turn around, you know.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, we feel isolated, we feel dismembered, we feel fractured. Anyway, that's another thing that I'm thinking lately.
Oh, that's beautiful, beautiful. I didn't want to interrupt it. You know, you were in a river flowing at that point, or in a cenote flowing at that point. And I just wanted you to go with it. I tell you some of the thoughts that came to my mind. The remembering, the dismembering was often a colonial act.
Mm-hmm.
And in such real ways. Up here, I don't know if you've heard the news, but you know, we've had these these residential schools where all the children from indigenous families were taken to these schools, and turns out that there were mass graves at these schools where children had died and just buried in these mass graves. And it's come to light. And the country is in shock. We had Canada Day and everyone refused to celebrate it because of it. But this is colonialism. This is, and it was a dismembering of the most basic form of mother and father and family and child. and the damage it did was horrendous. But I think that these colonial acts dismembered us from so much, you know, including from the stones and the stars and the water.
And it happened all over the world, because we are hearing right now in Canada what happened in India with the British colonialism. And it happened in the Americas with Spaniards and Portuguese and French people and the colonies, you know. They also forced a language on us, and a religion, and really fractured our connections of that ancestral knowledge. You know, they separated us from that. And how to recover or to uncover, more than recover, I think we need to uncover. You know, and it happens all over in a very dramatic way. Right now we are seeing it in Canada, like a genocide, really, but it happened all over. I was just reading a couple of days ago, precisely because of Canada, a local writer was saying, you know, we are all feeling this thing about Canada. We are looking at Canada because of they being so public about what they are doing and what is happening. He said, but let's not forget what happened with indigenous people in Mexico. And it was the same thing because of religion. To the issue, some of the kids were taken to Spain, taken from their parents, and were taken to Spain to be the smarter kids, were taken to Spain, but the others were taken into schools. But here, to teach them, not quote unquote to be civilized in terms of religion, but also because we didn't have slavery in the sense of we didn't bring people from Africa to work here, but the indigenous people were enslaved. So they will take the kids to teach them how to work in the big haciendas and ranchos and things, and to be enslaved by the Spaniards to cultivate the earth, but to separate from their knowledge that they have about how to harvest and how to seed, etc., to other knowledge that they brought from Spain. And so all that, I think, is coming out in many different places. And that's the power of educating and transforming. And
there we go.
How do you talk about this helps transform the relationships and helps transform the way in which we think about life and the way in which we think about knowledge, because what we learn about history is not what it was, what it is.
No, what it isn't.
So everything gets reconfigured, and that's the transformation.
Wow.
And like always, you know, we always start talking, Chris, and we never know where the conversation is going to take us.
Well, this is beautiful. It makes me very happy. Let me just put it to you, and are there other things that you want to discuss and talk about? related to this idea of communal practices?
It's because it doesn't matter what we talk about. Is how do we transform our practices into, how do we walk away from this rugged individualism
Thank you.
and reconnect again?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you are a lawyer, an engineer, or a chemist. How do you transform your practice so it reconnects you with the people with whom you work, with the environment of where you are working? So it's not just for psychotherapists or social workers or teachers and educators. This is for everyone. Doesn't matter what you do.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what your practice is, your professional practice. Is how do you see your practice so it reconnects you and reconnects communities and collectivities to the larger whole. So for me, this idea of collective practice is not just for the social sciences and the humanities. It's for everyone.
Yes.
For mathematicians and chemists and engineers and lawyers and doctors and people who work farms. How do we reconnect? How do we transform our practice into a meaningful practice that reconnects us with each other and with the environment in which we live? And I think that if CEOs start thinking in this way, we can transform life. And would be good for the economy also. I really believe so. It's not just about a hippie thing to think about this,
No.
you know? And in a way, you know, when you see some of these big, like, I don't know, I'm going to say something, and there are so many things we can criticize, but it's what Google did. When Google decided we are going to be the biggest company in the world in software, what they do? They reconnected people in different ways.
Yeah.
Instead of having everybody in their cubicle working in their computers, they created communal spaces.
Yes.
For people to have coffee and eat and talk and work and parks and outside spaces. And it was good for them and their workers. There's other things to criticize. I'm not saying,
yes,
and I'm not looking at this romantic, but I'm saying there is something there.
Yes.
There is something there that we need to figure out, no matter where we are.
That was a beautiful response. And I loved how you framed it not as an answer, but as the question.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, all of us need to answer that. There's not an answer waiting. We all need to create our answers to that. And it felt like an act of a good educator.
And because each situation has its own challenges.
Yeah.
So,
my friend, I love you and thank you.
Love you too, Chris. Love you too. And I love how the artist, this wonderful artist that writes and now plays music, and draws and paints and composes.
And I'm surrounded by it in here.
I love it.